Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this discussion with Nancy Silberkleit. I don't think I pronounced that correctly. The CEO of Archie Comics. A reminder that everyone is on mute, but if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box, and I will keep an eye on that. And now I'm going to hand this off to Dean Kuchar.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dean Kuchar, and I'm the liaison to libraries for Archie Comics. And I work for Nancy Silberkleit, and we're just here. We really support libraries, and if you need to reach out to us, feel free to reach out to me. Joanna will have my contact, because we do a lot of things for libraries. But I want to turn the program over to my boss, the co-CEO of Archie Comics, Nancy Silberkleit.
Well, zam, wham, wow to everyone. Something only a comic book publisher gets to say. But I do want to send a deep zam, wham, wow to Ramapo Catskill Library System for arranging this Zoom presentation. I'm Nancy Silberkleit, co-CEO of Archie Comics, and I just wanted to ask Dean, can I see the slides there? This is the slide here that shows my shoes that I wore for 25 years. So I'm waiting for that slide to come up. I don't know okay, there it is. So if we can get to my shoes. So those are the shoes I wore for 25 years as an elementary art teacher. It was that experience that helped me make the transition into business. It provided me the skills of patience. I was going into a family business. For those of you that may not know some of the history, Archie Comics was created by two families, Silberkleits and Goldwaters. And my dear husband's partner, Richard Goldwater, passed away. And then 7 months later, unexpectedly, my husband passed away. So Archie Comics was running rudderless. I was a teacher. I was left half the stock. And it's a long story. We could have another Zoom session. But it was those shoes, my teaching shoes, that really helped me make that transition. And I want each and every one of you, think about your shoes, the shoes that you stand in. You're all part of a profession that makes a real difference. Your profession offers many ways to make a positive difference in the lives of people. And you are all in very large communities. I hope I get to come visit your communities, and even if it's through Zoom or Blue Jeans, you have very large communities. You're all ambassadors to showing us, me especially, information and how to access it. You each make an impression in the lives of other people. And I want to share a very special story that maybe you'll, carry with you. I met a gentleman who had grown up in India. And when he met me, he was over the moon and shared with me that he had read every Archie Comics. He emphasized that word every with, a deep passion. Archie Comics ran, deeply through him. I just met one of your librarians who showed me her sheets. She has Archie sheets, and she sometimes lets her children, sleep on that Archie pillowcase. So I'll have to learn more about that story. But I naturally said to this gentleman, because he said he read every Archie Comics story. So I naturally asked, would it be possible to arrange a time for me to see his collection? And he said, Mom, I never bought an Archie comic. I never owned an Archie comic. It was my librarian who ordered all my Archie comics. So remember that. This was an older man who shared what his librarian gave him as a little boy. But there was something about my shoes that I did not have. I, shockingly, had never read an Archie comic. There I stepped out of the classroom when my husband passed away in 2008. I stepped in at 2009, and there was a problem with those shoes. I had never read an Archie comic. I had no love for reading. You know, I did graduate from college. I was an art teacher, but reading was not my thing. So I had to start updating myself with the Archie characters. I had to start learning about the Archie characters. And Dean, if we could show that slide of what I call the Abbey Road. So I was bringing home these comic books. I wasn't excited about it, but being the CEO, I had to read them. So I would pile them up and I would read them at night. And soon I found myself piling up the ones that made me laugh, piling up ones with important life lessons, ones that were very thoughtful. They were just, very moving. And I never could understand, why do people reread comic books? So I was piling up ones that I wanted to read again. I wanted to remember, that story I really loved. I piled up ones that made me laugh. I piled up with ones with impactful covers. I fell in love with reading at age 54 because I started finding there weren't enough pages for me in the comic books, and I started going to libraries and checking out books. I started going to bookstores, buying books. My first book I went to the library and checked out was the Da Vinci Code. I think I stayed up for 3 or 2 nights up to 3 in the morning reading that. I fell in love with reading by, just turning pages. So I started thinking about where was I when, Archie Comics gets into the hand of, a young person. Our targeted age group is the 7 and 8-year-old that usually, finds Archie Comics. Why had I not read these comic books? Where was I? What was happening when I was that very young age? And I happen to remember. I remember even what I was wearing. I was going into 2nd grade. I was stepping up. When you all get your new home, your new car, new promotion, that is huge. It's the same feeling for when someone is stepping up. It is impactful. And I was going into 2nd grade. I remember what I was wearing. I had this dress, had a gray bottom, yellow top, white polka dots. I was wearing white patent leather shoes. I was looking brilliant. I was looking smart. And when we got to Kettler Elementary in Westwood, New Jersey with my mom, I was standing by the kindergarten playground. I remember the spot vividly. And there on the playground, there were sections where you were going. And I saw the 2nd grade section and I was ready to bolt over. And my mother tugged my hand. She said, no, you're not going over there. You're going there. You're going to the 1st grade section. You're repeating 1st grade. You have been left back because you cannot read. That was it. That was it. No one had discussed it with me. And I feel that was the moment that the love of reading was stolen from me. I went back for another year, 1st grade. I remember the teacher, Mrs. Charmer, and she was no charm. The personality just didn't click. And I remember, See Jane Run. I remember the yellowing pages. No one put a comic book in front of my nose. So I feel the way reading was introduced to me was a punishment. So at age 54, the light bulb in my head clicked. It was a loud click. The revelation for me was dramatic and deeply personal. It pushed me to come up with a solution. My mission has been to get comic books into the hands of people. And Dean, if we could go to that next slide. I started a program called Comic Book Fairs. But when you look at this comic book, I never knew, I would be doing this, and I'm thankful I got this shot. Immediately, when someone picks up a comic book, they're engaged in reading. I sometimes wonder, should I take out insurance? Because as they were going to pay for these comic books, they're reading. They're going to bump into something and get hurt. But I quickly started, because that light bulb had come on in me, how I found the love of reading through a comic book. And I coined the phrase, comic books, with that plus sign. Comic books plus children equal reading. That was my first quote. But as I went on reading more and more and feeling very proud of myself, comic books, not only comic books plus children equal reading, they equal knowledge. And once you got knowledge, you got confidence. And once you got confidence, you got creativity going. So I, believe in utilizing graphics. It's one of the oldest languages around. The minimal text found in speech bubbles alongside of rich graphics provides a space I refer to as the gray area. Just look at that space. You see the speech bubbles there and words will be in them, but then there's that space where you find the rich graphics. This is where the reader is engaged to expand the story. Reading a comic book becomes a personal literary read. One's thoughts, opinions, values emerge, naturally deepening the comprehension. It's an internal experience. Comic books are a complex literary experience. I heard you are challenged all the time with parents coming in saying, I want a book, and you show them graphic literacy books, and they say, no, I want a real book. Tell them, comic books are a complex literary experience. Graphics trigger the brain for analysis. Graphic novels can dramatically improve reading development for the child that is already an avid reader and reading is under their belt. It helps push them to be independent thinkers. That is what schools are all about today. They're all about, pushing out an independent thinker. So letting someone dive in to graphic literacy, they're always exercising that part of the brain for thinkers. So they're becoming independent thinkers. And also for people like me, it hooks one into the love of reading. And also it provides contextual clues, emotional context to information being provided. And let's not forget the English language learners are motivated by graphic novels, helping them acquire new vocabulary and increase English proficiency. So let's take a look at the next slide. How many times did I need to be told about reducing my use of single-use plastic. I am not a tree hugger, but I'm there with a environmental story. I asked our writers and our artists to come up with something, but it happened to be this specific panel that pushed me to, change my ways. It may not work for everyone. Maybe the whole story would motivate someone to start thinking about their engagement with single-use plastics. But once I saw this visual, it connected with me to start changing my life at home and not having, plastic water bottles, having cups or reusable bottles. But it really made an impression on me. So it was my learning style that needed contextual clues. Various learning styles like mine, or such as an autistic mind, may require support. For example, for an autistic person wanting to be able to learn and identify what is bullying. Here is an example of emotional context. What is it about comics? I say it's the clever structure of the story. How much personality of the book comes from the artist. Here you have a story, but here you have a panel with no words. And it's the storytelling of the pictures that the artist creates, being a co-creator storyteller. So you have the writer, and then you have the beautiful graphics where the artist, the illustrators, being a co-creator storyteller. The expressiveness on her face in this panel, in her eyes, is exceptional. The use of color, the hues, the vibrant color, or the inky blackness of her eyebrows convey the vibe of the story, and therefore it connects with the reader. Let's bring up the next panel. I wanted to have a new character in Archie Comics that could address autism, address inclusion. If a librarian wanted to get into conversation on autism, maybe they would feel awkward. The same for a parent or a teacher. So I felt creating a character that could spark the conversation. This is Scarlett Saltee. She is a new teen in Archie Comics, and she's very skilled in building. She has not only building visual things, but ideas. But Scarlett wants everyone to know that autism is only one small part of who she is. So comic books can be integrated into curriculum. If you wanted to talk about kindness and inclusion in comic books, in a subject, go to comic books. Comic books is a part of the U.S. Common Core standards, especially in the areas of English, science, and social studies and art. So stories change hearts, stories change minds, stories provide hope. So the next time you see a superhero movie, or even Scarlett, I look at her as my superhero. Comics are more than just getting the bad guy. Comics are a powerful resource for conveying information. So if you wanted to talk about autism or science, approach it with comic books. It's a brilliant path to engage one into information. And I believe, because I'm an example of it, building a love for reading. So I'd like to share, I'm going to put it back to Dean. I'd like to share, how comic books can be a segue into English, science, social studies, or art. So Dean or Joanna, you can pick it up from here and we can allow for questions.
And see how she comes.
Everyone has the option to unmute yourselves if you would like to ask a question, or you can type it into the chat. Just a reminder that if you are not asking a question, please keep yourself on mute to cut down on background noise.
Joanna, I thought maybe Dean could go over that cover we just saw about, how to access these books through the system, the digital systems that you provide. And then I can talk about what they can find when their patrons check out a digital comic book. So Dean, do you want to talk about that?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm going to share one of the comics. Just Nancy picked one of the digests. These digests all have, almost 200 pages, and they have multiple stories in them. And we know you guys have the digital comic systems. One is Overdrive, one is Hoopla, is what I'm going to be showing you on. And those are probably really helpful for kids, especially now when they're not able to come to your library physically. So what Nancy's going to do, I'm going to take through, she picked just a comic out, and we're going to just take you through it. Nancy's going to take you through a couple examples of stories within the comic and how a librarian can use those to spur learning and engage the kids. So the first, I'm going to go back and I'm going to share my screen now. We're just going to pick out one of these Archie digests.
Could you pick out Trendsetter?
You want to go to Trendsetter? You got it. Okay, so I will go.
I had shared with one of your librarians who was on earlier how I've been going around the country and the globe doing story time. And one of the stories I'm reading is not a comic book, it's Goodnight Moon, but then I go into reading a comic book. And I chose this one because, again, it's about inclusion and kindness. It's a 5-page story. I only read 4 pages, and then I allow the exercise of the children. I was with 50 children yesterday in Brownsville, Texas, through Zoom, and I told them to create the 5th page. Let them finish the story. So this way, you're engaging in writing skills, character development, and also talking about social behaviors. Because what happens in this story, it's not so nice. They're giving Archie a hard time. So that was this. And if you would like me to do story time in your library, I'm delighted. I do it for free, and you can get the comic book for free through these digital system that your library has and supports. So another interesting thing in this library, in this digest, it's amazing. It's a little book, has a lot of stories, but this particular library of digest that you can get through your library is Archie Library 26. You can show the cover again, Dean. I don't put the stories together, but our team, they did a magnificent job because I happened to go to the Philippines, and then I'm looking around to see, because I wanted to talk about another story in here. It was a science one, environment. But the first page was Archie goes to the Philippines. So how cool that was for me, but also it allows a librarian, a parent, a teacher to talk about global map skills or about culture. Where is the Philippines? What's the weather like? Like right now, they just are having a terrible time, not only with COVID, but the monsoons. It's just been, terrible over there. And then I went on and I found another story where one of our characters, Raj Patel, is filming his sister. And if anyone wants to, talk about character development and also about, why, they're dressed like this. They're dressed. You could talk about different cultures and the clothing, the garb that they wear in different cultures. But I picked this one out purposely, showing how character development, part of Raj's character is his hobby, his passion to always be filming. I strongly feel that everyone needs a hobby or a skill, especially if bullying, if one unfortunately encounters being bullied, it gives you, it doesn't fix the situation, but it gives you a space, a healthy space to fall back on something that you're interested in, something you're passionate in. So if you want to talk about, oh, you should have a hobby or, a passion, you may have lost them. Let's read this comic book and let's talk about character development. And just that little scene of Raj with the camera in his hand, I think is brilliant. And one of my passions for all of you is that I collect Archie comic, not books, but stuff. And I have a traveling exhibit that only goes to libraries for free. So if you have a display case that locks, it can come to you. And I know we're not allowing people into our libraries, but maybe you would want to do it digitally. So again, you can contact Joanna and get in touch with me. But that particular story for me was to talk about passions and interests that one should think about. And then Trendsetter I thought was fabulous. And there's so many more stories, but the last story is called Getting Drastic with Plastic. I heard how the country Rwanda had banned plastic bags. They were the first country to ban plastic bags. So what did I do? My global footprint is not impressive. I got on a plane and I went there and I saw for myself, and then I came back with information. And again, one of our fabulous writers and illustrators gave me this story. But this story can lend itself to environmental issues. It can lend interest to looking at governments. An ambassador to Rwanda came here. She's a female. Many people in government in Rwanda are female. So it just is a great way to integrate curriculum and remember reading comic books is part of the Common Core standards. So you can have these conversations when you come across a parent who, doesn't get it. I'm sure all of you do get how complex reading graphic literacy is. So I will, stop there. And now is a good time we could ask some questions. And I'm sure Joanna has a few in front of her now.
Okay, so if you would like to type a question to the chat, please do so or unmute yourselves. To get us started, there is a comment in the chat from Sarah, and she said, I remember a few years ago, people were freaking out because Archie Comics introduced an openly gay character. Could you talk about the development of that character and how Archie Comics responded to the negative feedback?
Well, I'm very glad that you picked up on that because, I stepped out of the classroom to be a co-CEO and I was scared to death. But the one thing I felt is about inclusion. It was, and your shoes are so powerful. I was very hesitant, but it was my time working with children that really made me overqualified for the job. The same thing for you. You work with huge communities. You have so much power, to offer your ideas. So when I went in there, I said, we're Riverdale High, but I feel we are not exposing who makes up Riverdale High. We need a character that shows diversity when it comes to sexual preference. So that's where it started. And then it went, to, deeper conversation about, what's the character going to look like. And Dan Parent came up with the likeness of Kevin Keller. So we had many different reading groups. So of course, when you have many different people have different views on one's dating style, and we know it can go to a level orange or to that, rainbow of inclusiveness. So of course, we heard from a lot of people, but we are a company that services a lot of different groups. So, that's how we handled it. We are making up Riverdale High, showing who makes up that community. So we wanted to be relevant. So I don't know if I answered all your questions there, but it was about becoming relevant and, to make something great, you need parts. So it was just my little idea, and then putting it out there to the general public welcomed Kevin Keller. But again, there were people that did write comments, but on the whole, it was a very welcoming addition to Riverdale High. That's how people embraced the project.
Well, Sarah followed up and said, thank you for showing readers a more accurate depiction of the world they live in. Emily has a question. She asked, how do you feel about Riverdale and Katie Keene, the shows and the ways they've used the comics as dramas? They've become so popular with teens, especially.
And you hit on it. It has become so popular with teens. It has become popular in Dublin, in India, UK, Canada, Australia, Philippines, Singapore. I have been all over. Here we came out again with a little idea. Archie Comics has a formula that started 80 years ago. It would put a bunch of kids in a high school, create a little bit of chaos. This was in 80 years ago. But let the teens work it out. Let them figure it out without adult intervention, but always bring in a little bit of the decade into whatever that drama is. So here we start out with the hula hoop skirts, and then we got the mod era, and then we got cell phones. Well, cell phones with technology quickly disappeared. You then saw texting. So when we put Riverdale into that forum of Netflix, Warner Brothers, we hired a writer, Roberto Sacasa Sakura. His natural writing is always dark, but he knew the formula. Put them into the high school, create chaos, but reflect with the decade. So what do you have in our decade in 2020? You have opioid abuse. Now we've got the covert. You have a lot of darkness. So that's what happened. But the beauty of it was the teens, because there were teens that had never come across the comic book. So it became then a cross-generational magnet, because I had a 70-year-old woman say she was aware her grandchildren were going to watch Riverdale. And she read about it a little bit, but she wanted to be cool. So she went downstairs, and she could not believe how she became hooked on it. And when she talked about her Archie, the kids were curious. So they started gravitating to the comic books that they had never read. So here you have older generations liking the show. It's very dark. And then the kids who, in this millennial and what's the Z, all that generation, they love the dark stuff, also becoming curious and looking at the classic comics. So it's become a wonderful project. And the Katie Keene show is fabulous. And, the Chilling Tales of Sabrina has been a huge hit. So we've been very fortunate.
Mark had a follow-up question on LGBT. Would you consider more characters to expand on the inclusive nature, for instance, having transgender and asexual characters?
I have, put soon as we came out with Kevin Keller, I have had that conversation. It takes a long time to get things off the ground. So the conversation has been presented by myself. So but now we have a whole nother thing, to deal with. It has put publishers on different tracks. So I'm right there with you, and the conversation has been going on.
So Will just had a comment to go off of that, and he said that he heard that Jughead can be seen as asexual.
Yes, that was always a conversation when my husband was alive. People would always ask him that, and my husband and trend then was never talk about things that were off of So when I had presented this idea, I talked about, bringing, sexual, I have Jughead right here, Jughead's, what do you have to say, Jughead? But again, it was about intellectual property, keeping that conversation where it had been for all those years. So it only made it more powerful for Kevin to introduce Kevin Keller, that he's going to take on this platform for conversation on sexual preference. But it was always wondering if, because, he's always running from Ethel. So we thought it would be more powerful for Jughead's intellectual property to keep it there where it could always be debated.
So Danielle has a question, and she said, I know you touched on it, but as a former teacher, how would you explain to a parent of a reluctant reader that it's okay for their child to read comics? A lot of parents, in my experience, feel that comics don't count.
Okay, well, I would go back to what the goal is for schools. The goals want independent thinkers. And if there is any type of support for cultivating an independent thinker, it's a comic book. There is nothing around it. And explain to the parent what one has to do. They have to engage in the storytelling. They become a part of it. You have the writer that put out the platform of the story. You have the illustrator that is co-collaborating, but you need the reader to expand that. So once your child buries their nose into this like bowl of candy, of colors and fun, the beauty of it is they're asking for you to be in part of it. People today want to be part of everything. That's why companies are always, having, missions and platforms. They want you to know what they stand for. They welcome you into their business, being part of propelling it. Same for a comic book. It is asking you to be engaged. And that's what people like to be. They don't want to be just lectured to. They want to be a part of it. So it's an exciting moment, tell the parent. So once that child is opening those pages, they're exercising that part of the brain. They are putting in their values, their ideas, their thoughts, they're internalizing. And once it becomes part of you, it sticks with it. And when you're turning the pages of a comic book, it is building that love of reading. And then you want to start reading more books. We have a lot of books. I hope your libraries are able to, pick up. We have so many Archie books with hard covers. But just imagine if it was the Da Vinci Code. It's about finding the love of turning pages, and you just naturally go off to reading books. Even if it was not a comic book, a cereal box, it just pushes you to want to find that downtime where you're engaged. So comic books engage you into the act of reading. So did I help there? You can tell them to call me. And you can also, I will send to Joanna, behind me, there was a magazine that did an article on me in 2014, How Comics Made Me Love Reading. So you can give that article to the parent who doesn't get the power graphic literacy offers.
Before I move on to the next question, someone just asked if you could repeat what you said that your husband always said regards with Jughead. I think there was a little bit of background noise and we missed it.
Oh, well, it's not that he just never would answer the question. They would never talk if Archie liked the Mets or the Yankees. They always didn't want to make a commitment to anything. And we're a business. Intellectual property is huge. Archie will never decide. We had the wedding story. People were thrilled. It was one of our hit stories. They thought Archie was going to decide, but it's intellectual property. You cannot. His IP is he will never decide between Betty and Veronica. Jughead's intellectual property is huge. His eating, his philosophy. He's a good friend. He's a philosopher to Archie, and also his sexual preference. We don't know. We've never been able to figure it out. So my husband never would say really anything. I don't know how I have to go back and see if there's any words that he used, but I know it was about intellectual property. So he would never lead the conversation where it would go any further than, we don't know.
The next question, I'm actually going to smush two questions together. The first part is, could you talk about how 80 years ago Archie Comics came to be? And the next part is a question from someone who actually couldn't join us today but wanted me to ask. What is your vision for the future of Archie Comics?
Well, how Archie Comics came to be, one of my wishes in life is if Louis Silberkleit and John Goldwater Sr. could be here at the table with me, and if I could tell them what a gift they gave to the world. These were two businessmen. Louis Silberkleit, my father-in-law, was publishing, pulp fiction. He was in the business of publishing. His background was a pharmacist. John Goldwater Sr. was a businessman. So somehow he had connected with Louis and said, he could, I guess, bring money in or whatever. So it was the partnership that began with two families, the Goldwaters and the Silberkleits. And then there was the idea of coming up with a male character with two girls, because you had Andy Hardy television, where he was all-American boy with one girl with blonde hair, the other girl with a brunette, and he couldn't decide. So there was a lot in entertainment going on there where, they had been inspired and influenced on what drew people to entertainment. So they thought, let's come up with a character like the Andy and Hardy. So that's how it started. And Archie Comics was really thought of with, we need something for females, because the comic book industry was dedicated to the male, to boys, zam, wham, bang, blowing things up and dueling. It was not very inviting for the female. But what Louis, and that was their intention, to provide love, romance, to the girl population and fashion. So they didn't realize that the boys would start using, these comic stories as a guide on dating, a guide on how to dress. I met a man in Athens that told me he relied on reading Archie comics to inspire him on his dressing. I'm going, really? But it is powerful, the energy that goes into making a comic book story, because at Archie Comics, they would subscribe to every fashion magazine, every teen magazine. So before the writers and the artists, put anything out, they were doing their research to make sure their ear was to the ground of what intrigued the readers. And there's someone in Athens, Greece, really connected to the fashions. So those are, the elements that went into creating Archie Comics. They wanted something for the girls. And if all of you can see this, I am starting a campaign for equality for Archie Comics, because when I go into the libraries around the globe, I see Dark Horse, I see Marvel, I see DC Comics, and then I may see one or two hardcovers of Archie. I feel that is not giving that equality message, because we know girls are heavily into graphic literacy now. And I think it sends a wrong message when, you don't have Archie there equally. There's one library who's doing a fabulous job in Mamaroneck. She has it must go this long of her Archies. She finally had to have a special section for Archie because it's so big. So, check out where you order from and think about that visual equality, because you want the young girl to, find something that they can relate to. So that's how Archie started out. It was intended for, the 7-8-year-old girl to think about love and fashion.
And the second part of that question was, what is your vision for the future of Archie?
Well, I had always been the queen of digital. When Mr. Michael I. Silberkleit was alive and around the table, I said, honey, I just took a class, it was called an Intel class, and I feel the way everyone's going to be accessing their comic books is digitally. He said no. He was afraid of piracy. He didn't want to hear any more from his Nancy. He always called me his lady in overalls. I always wore overalls. Now I try to dress myself in orange to mimic Archie's orange hair, because I say my face belongs to Archie Andrews. But he always called me his lady in overalls, and I didn't think he ever listened to me. And interesting, after he died, there was a stamp I talked about, how he should have a stamp, and he never knew that the United States Post Office put Archie Comics in the series called the Fun Day, Sunday Funnies, and we had a postal stamp. But that was, again, from me talking at the dinner table. But with digital, it was a no. So when Michael passed away, I did call the office, and at that time we still had no leaders. And believe me, it was not in my crystal ball ever to be sitting in this seat. And I said to the two people that were, trying to hold the company together, get it up digitally. They didn't want to. They were afraid to. There's two families. Richard had passed away. There was issues being emerged. People, the other side wanted my stock, so they wouldn't move with it. But once I came in with my partner as John Goldwater Jr. And Nancy Silberkleit as co-CEOs, I want to get us up digitally. So I see Archie Comics now with this COVID becoming even more digital. So for our future, what I see is Archie Comics on the platform of comic books getting more heavily into digital. We have like every comic book available on Hoopla, and the other one, what was that one?
Overdrive.
Overdrive. But also, we're becoming a big entertainment company. We're about entertainment, and it has now gone on the path of the TV screens. So that's how I see us. Big entertainment commitment to the people around the globe, and also more people finding us through the digital comics, a digital experience of reading comics.
It looks like there are two more questions from Lauren and Danielle. And if someone typed in a question and I missed it, please just type it in again. So Lauren asks, does the text in comic books require a particular reading order of the speech bubbles, or is it designed for the reader to choose where to start following the thread of the story?
I'm not so sure if I understand that, but let me say something about speech bubbles. I have various talks under my hat, so if you ever have a program, I talk about the elements that go into comic book writing, and I feel the speech bubbles are just a huge talk, because you can make your writing come alive. If you want to create the feeling of noise, you would use that loud speech bubble. If you want to bring it down to a whisper, I talk about utilizing the whisper bubble. So, it's very important when you write something, you want people to read it. Again, I feel the comic book platform is a huge way to draw interest into, reading your ideas and your words, because you're creating this platform, this vibrant platform, and setting the tone of the story. So it's also complex in reading a comic book. So when you give someone, a first-time reader, a comic book, you have to use your finger and point. So there is a tracking process. And again, that is good for the brain, tracking things and helping one improve their eye coordination. So did I answer that question? Because sometimes when there's confusion where to go, which panels, once you start reading it, then you'll think, oh, I think I should have gone back there. So sometimes you can naturally, figure it out with the words in those speech bubbles. And while we're talking about words, Stan Lee always told all of his writers to put in those SAT words. I go around, I don't have it here today with me, but I have this one panel where Miss Beasley has the word on a cookbook. Miss Beasley represents the school, chef at Riverdale High. And she has on a cookbook, plethora of potatoes. Well, me, not being a strong reader, my vocabulary is not so good. I would usually have a dictionary with me, but when I started reading comic books, I had the support of visuals. I did not have to look up in a dictionary for the word plethora. So you always find fabulous words that you will see on SATs, and it's a great way to build up, one's vocabulary.
Next question is from Danielle, and she asks, have you ever done an appearance at a library con? If so, what kind of things do you do?
I would love to be at a library con. I've been at many cons, and also library cons. If any of you have any feeling after you leave, if you could write to those people and ask them to have me as a speaker. So I've been in library, small library cons. And I even started one for White Plains. It's called Comic Fest. I belong to an anti-bullying group for a youth center in White Plains. So we had our culmination meeting years ago, and I said, I really don't think we're connecting to the right people. We always have the Girl Scouts come. We really have to connect to the people that don't get about being kind and inclusive to people. Why don't we have a Comic-Con? They go, what's that? And I said, oh, people dress up. And they go, Nancy, you don't understand. People don't come to things in White Plains. I said, well, can I try? So I knocked on the White Plains Library door. I explained to him. He said, sure. We had a group wrapped around the building. We're going on our 6th year of Comic-Cons, but unfortunately we had to cancel this one and we're going to do something digitally. But I have been to many libraries, even Athens, Greece. I'm going to be doing this talk in Athens, Greece on Monday, but they had me as their keynote speaker in Athens, Greece, I think about 2 years ago, where I was at their library con. So I don't know if you're talking about that library con, but if you have a library con, let me know and I'll be there.
I think you'll have a few people in contact with you. So Eileen asked, your story is very interesting. Have you ever thought of writing your own memoir, maybe in graphic novel form?
Well, I have a bunch of books. I had an agent and she said, honey, you got a lot of stories in you. It's just, when is the right time to launch it? It is an amazing story, and there's many different paths that has shown me that I have many different books. So you will be maybe the first to know when a book is ready, but I can't tell you I don't know how to say it. And again, it's because I was not a good reader expressing myself and finding the words, but you are all ambassadors to showing people information and how to access it. Your shoes are so powerful. And I can't tell you how, I didn't look at the power I held by being a teacher. And it was not so much being a teacher, but having that opportunity to engage with people. And that's what you all do. You're always engaging with people, leading them to information, and how that man in India remembers his librarian. So, and I remember something about people by maybe the shoes they wear or the eyeglasses. So maybe, today I'm finding librarians with tattoos and long hair and ponytails or cool t-shirts. The libraries rock today. It is not a place to find shush and hush. It is the go-to place. So that's another thing that I do as I travel around the United States, is that I let people know that libraries are the go-to place. They are the cool place. So Nancy, Carolyn, Eileen, Lauren, I think I saw Carolyn, Barbara, and Morgan, and all the other names I can't see on the screen. Find something special that you like and be consistent about it. Because when you're consistent, like with, Jughead's IP and Archie and Betty's IP, people remember that and carry it. So be proud of what you do. Interesting, I said to my daughter, what do you think about mommy when she goes to speak? I don't want to say hi, good morning, I can't hear you, hello. I want to say this. What do you think? Zam, wham, wow. Because mommy, don't do it. I always listen to my daughter because she's a very smart girl. But I took a chance because my daughter's always right. But I took a chance, and it was very turbulent in my gut. Should I do that? Today, when you go to Google and you put in the word Zam, wham, wow, I show up. And it was, Stan Lee that always said, Excelsior. Well, now, today, in 2020, when you go to Google, it's Nancy Silberkleit going, Zam, wham, wow. So, you be consistent. Do something and hold it tight to your heart and be proud of it, because you are making a huge difference in your communities. It's your library walls that you're there, but it's going out into these huge communities. So remember how powerful your shoes are.
That seems like a great note to end on. Thank you so much. If anyone has any follow-up questions for Nancy that they think of later, please let me know and we can put you in touch. And I would like to thank Nancy and Dean and everyone for joining us this morning.
And, please have me come read, because one of my points in readings at story time, I'm letting children know to connect to their libraries to get a library card to be able to go and check out books digitally. A lot of people think, oh, I don't have a library card. I said the libraries are open. They're open in a different way, but they will get you a library card. So I get to enforce this message through doing story time. And again, get in touch with Joanna and Dean, and they can tell you more about that. And it's all free.
All right, well, you're receiving a lot of thank yous, and this was great in the chat. And someone said, I hope you write that memoir.
Thanks, Joanna. We really appreciate all the work you did to set it up.
And thank you. This is great.
And have a Zam Wham Wow weekend. It's sunny and beautiful here. So, and wash your hands and take distancing seriously.